Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, which text are we starting with? Seven? All right. Chapter 8. Attaining the Supreme. Text 7. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudyacha mai arpita mano buddhir mam evaishyasya samshayaha. Translation. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. Text 8. Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasananya gamina paramam purusham divyam yati partanu chintayan. He who meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, is sure to reach me. Text 9. Kavim Puranam Munushashitaram Anoraniyam Samanusmaredyaha Savasya Dataram Achinta Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parastat. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and being transcendental is beyond this material nature. Text 10. Ayana kale manasa chalena bhaktya yukto yoga balena chaiva purvamadeva namavesha samyak satam param purusham upaiti divyam. One who at the time of death fixes his life air between the eyebrows and in full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 11. Yaraksharameda vido vadanti vishanti yad yatayo vitaragaha yad ichshanto brahmacharyam charanti tate padam sangrahena pravakshe. Persons learned in the Vedas who utter Omkara and who are great sages in the renounced order enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Text 12. Sarvadvarani samyamya manohridi narutyacha murnyathyayatmana pranam astito yogataranam. The yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all the doors of the senses and fixing the mind on the heart and the life air at the top of the head. One establishes himself in yoga. Text 13. Om ityekaksharam brahma vyaharan mamanusmaran ya prayati tyajan deham sayati paramam gatim. After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. 14. Ananya cheta satatam yo mam smarati nityashaha syaham sulabha partha nitya yuktasya yoginaha. The one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pratha, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. 615. Mamupetya punarjanma dukhalayama shashvatam napnuvanti mahatmana samsiddham paramam gataha. After attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection. Text 16. Abrahma bhuvana loka punar avartino arjuna mamupetya tukhanteya punar janma navidyate. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Text 17. Sahasra yuga paryantam maharyad brahmano viduhu ratrim yuga sahasrantam te horatra vito janaha. By human calculation, 1,000 ages taken together is the duration of Brahma's one day, and such also is the duration of his night. So we can go back to text 7. It's a short purport by Srila Prabhupada. I'll read that and then translation. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. Purport. This instruction to Arjuna is very important for all men engaged in material activities. The Lord does not say that one should give up his prescribed duties or engagements. One can continue them and at the same time think of Krishna by chanting Hare Krishna. This will free one from material contamination and engage the mind and intelligence in Krishna. By chanting Krishna's names, one will be transferred to the supreme planet, Krishna Loka, without a doubt. So, one of the major themes here is death. Most importantly, how to remember Krishna at the time of death. And Krishna, he explains the process of how yogis fix their consciousness and think of him. He gives many examples of ways to meditate on him and think of him. But this is the process for the jnanis and the yogis to fix the prana, focus on the eyebrow and chant Om and thinking of Krishna. I mean, Krishna, he said in the previous chapter that he is Omkara. So connecting that knowledge, he's saying the yogi should think of the Supreme Lord in these various ways and chant Om and think of him, and he'll go to the spiritual world. But this isn't the path of the devotee. The devotee simply chants Hare Krishna and remembers Krishna, and Krishna takes care of him. And Krishna will explain that later on in the chapter. I wanted to touch on the beginning of the chapter and read something that can enlighten us more than what I can. That's why I brought this TV out to go deeper into it. But so these middle 6 chapters, beginning with chapter 7, are the essence of the Bhagavad-gita. You know, it's described that the middle 6 chapters are protected by the front 6 chapters and the back 6 chapters, where these describe devotional service, you know, the opulence of Krishna being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we just finished reading chapter 7, and let me see if I could remember here. It's in text 29 of chapter 7, Krishna mentioned many things that sparked Arjuna's interest. trying to see if it's more than just, oh yeah, the last two, text 29 and 30. We could just read them real quick. Text 29. Jara marana mokshaya mam ashutya yatampi pe brahmatad vidho kritsnam adhyatmam karma chakyalam. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental and fruitive activities. In text 30. Sadhibhutati taivamam sadhiyagyam chaye viduhu prayana kale pichamam viduyukta chetasaha. Those who know me as the Supreme Lord, as the governing principle of the material manifestation, who know me as the one underlying all the demigods and as the one sustaining all sacrifices, can with steadfast mind understand and know me even at the time of death. Which leads to chapter 8 in Arjuna. In the first two texts, he asks these questions. He says, Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. He says, how does this Lord of sacrifice live in the body? In which part does he live, O Mother Sudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? So these specific words that Arjuna is inquiring to is Brahma, Adhyatmam, Karma, Adibhutam, Aditaivam, Adiyagya, and Prayana Kale. So, well, how do we get this to work again? So this is a study guide essentially compiled by Bhagavad Prabhu, to take, if he reads it deeper into the Bhagavad-gita, where he's studied, all the shlokas, how they flow together, and from an overview perspective, and also the different commentaries of the different acharyas to give a more broad-rounded vision of what's actually being said, rather than just getting lost in each shloka or each chapter. So he mentions what I just mentioned about Arjuna's inquiring into these things, and then I wanted to read the answer that he wrote, which is very nice. He quotes from Srila Prabhupada and elaborates on it more. So Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. So Arjuna first asked, what is Brahman? He wants to know if Brahman refers to the Jiva or to the Paramatma. Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit. It is said that one should understand that he is Brahman, spirit soul. This Brahman conception of life is also in devotional service. The pure devotees are transcendentally situated on the Brahman platform, and they know everything about transcendental activities. Only persons who perform activities in Krishna consciousness, Mam Ashritya, are actually entitled to be called Brahman, because they are actually endeavoring to reach the Krishna planet. Such persons have no misgivings about Krishna, and thus they are factually Brahman. Unquote. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushana analyzes Arjuna's remaining questions as follows. What is the Adhyatma? Ask if the Adhyatma, the self, pertains to the gross or subtle body. So Arjuna wants to know specifically what the Adhyatma is referring to. And he says, what is karma? He asks if karma refers to fruitive or spiritual activity, and why. If they are equivalent, he should fight. What is the Adibhuta? Arjuna is asking, what gross physical things are you referring to? Items such as pots or the bodies of living beings. Who is the Adidaiva? He asks if the Adidaiva, the governor of demigods, is a demigod or the Virat Purusha, the universal form of the Lord. The prefix Adi is significant. One definition of it is above, over, and above. In another respect, then, Arjuna is asking about the identity of Adi, the one above or ruling over the body, the physical manifestation and the demigods. And the next verse, he will ask about the identity of the ones above all sacrifices, and further, where the Lord resides. Who is the Lord of sacrifice, and how does he live in the body, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Arjuna now inquires about the sixth term, Adiyagya. By inquiring about Adiyagya, Arjuna wants to understand the identity of the one who is ultimately worshipped by the performance of sacrifice. Is it Vishnu, a demigod? And whoever he is, where in the body does he live? In this verse, Arjuna asks an additional question, the answer to which becomes a major topic in this chapter. How can those engaged in the devotional service, the self-controlled, know you at the time of death? In the next two verses, Krishna quickly answers Arjuna's first 6 questions. So Arjuna is asking these questions, and then Krishna explains all of them really quickly. And then the last one, how to remember him at the time of death, he elaborates through the chapter. But this is the main part I really wanted to read, so I paid attention. What? You want to read? You can read. The Supreme Personality of God that said the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, the fruit of activities. Arjuna's questions and Krishna's answers are as follows. This really sums it up and makes it easier to grasp. 1. What is Brahman? Krishna tells Arjuna that the jiva is Brahman. Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman, there is Para Brahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Para Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What is the self? The nature of the jiva, the adhyatma or self, is to eternally serve. Srila Prabhupada says, the constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the Lord of matter. But in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. What is karma? Karma is not simply activity, but specifically activity that develops a material body. Again, karma is specifically activity that develops a material body. Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, when the living entity is the material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. Unquote. Srila Prabhupada's purport also gives a technical description of karma from the Chandogya Upanishad. Karma in this technical sense specifically refers to the journey of a jiva to the heavenly planets, his return to the earth, and his acquiring a human body after falling from the heavens in the form of rain. In answering Arjuna's first 3 questions, Krishna has clarified the difference between the body and the soul. He has also explained the difference between the activity of the body, which causes the soul's bondage, and the spiritual activity of the soul executed in the material world, which causes neither karma nor bondage. In other words, the soul is spiritual, its nature is devotional service to Krishna, and its karma is the material body, or its conditioned nature. Continuing, or best of the embodied beings, the physical nature which is constantly changing is called Adibhuta, the material manifestation. The universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods, like those of the sun and the moon, is called Adidaiva. And I, the Supreme Lord, represented as Supersoul in the heart of every embodied being, am called Adiyagya, the Lord of sacrifice. Or what is Adibhuta? Srila Prabhupada writes, the physical nature is constantly changing. Material bodies generally pass through 6 stages. They are born, they grow, they remain for some duration, they produce some byproducts, they dwindle, and they vanish. This physical nature is called Adibhuta. It is created at a certain point and will be annihilated at a certain point. Krishna is the ultimate governor of the ever-changing material nature. 5. Who is Adidaiva? Srila Prabhupada says, the conception of the universal form of the Supreme Lord, which includes all the demigods and their different planets, is called Adidaivata. Srila Prabhupada further describes the universal form, the Adidaivata Virat Rupa, in his purport to the Bhagavatam 2.129. I'm going to skip over that part. Who is Ariyagya? Where in the body does he live? Krishna is the Supreme Lord, is the super soul, is the enjoyer of all sacrifice. Ariyagya. Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, present in the body along with the individual soul is the super soul, a plenary representation of Lord Krishna. The super soul is called the Paramatma or the Ariyagya and is situated within the heart. In conclusion, when we perform sacrifices or we worship the demigods or the continuously changing material manifestation, we indirectly worship Krishna himself. If, however, we worship Krishna as the governing principle behind all three, then we can know him even at the time of death. And that is the answer in brief to Arjuna's final question. How can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? So I could just keep reading this because he really breaks it down so nicely, but just to try to digest and process what's being said, where there's all these technical terms and Krishna's explaining them, and Arjuna's kind of I don't want to say lost, but he's inquisitive. He wants to know what's going on. So similarly, we hear all these terms and they can be very technical, but then Srila Prabhupada, he makes them so simple. There's different classes of yogis and jnanis, and they sit and ask, what is the question? What is Brahman? What is Brahman? What is self? What is Atma? These things. And Prabhupada simplifies it into just a simple paragraph. And, I was reading through this earlier, and it's very nice the way that Rajan Prabhu, he walks you through, as you could see, each shloka, and explaining what's going on and how it connects to the next shloka. And this way, it gives you a much more detailed view of what Krishna's trying to say, not trying to say, what he is saying. And it allows us to grasp it from a more of a total perspective. It's easy to read one shloka or, 10 shlokas at a time, or, we may learn shlokas and recite them at certain times, but then they kind of stand out as individual. I'm being distracted and disturbed by my senses, so that, which you remember this certain shloka that Krishna says to help you with this certain aspect of life. But this is a fluid conversation where Krishna is delivering information and Arjuna's inquisitively asking questions about them to reveal more and more information. So just like we heard, Arjuna inquired and Krishna answered these. And then Krishna begins to explain how one can remember him at the time of death. And like I mentioned earlier, he does this in a, varying ways. But then, trying to get to these texts that we read today. Where was they? So, text 8 says, he who meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, is sure to reach me. So we just think of Krishna, and Krishna's promising that we're sure to come to him. And then, like I mentioned, he gives these 10 different ways of how we can meditate on him. And he says one should meditate upon the Supreme Person as one who knows everything, as he was the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and being transcendental is beyond this material nature. Whenever I read this sloka, I find it very interesting because when you read in the Srimad Bhagavatam and you hear many different prayers from many great personalities, we're often praying to the Lord in this way, O you glorious Lord, who's beyond the three modes of material nature, you who is infallible and eternal, who is the biggest of the biggest, the smallest of the small, who's controlling everything. This is a good way to have like a prefix of meditating and approaching the Lord. And then, like I mentioned, Krishna, he explains how the yogis, they can sit and meditate and chant Omkara, thinking of him. And then he explains the difference of the material and the spiritual worlds, and pointing out the fallacy of being here in the material world, that from the position of Brahma, who's not so influenced by the lower modes of material nature and who is living a much, much longer life, ultimately everything gets destroyed and comes into creation again, destroyed and comes into creation again. So, Krishna is explaining the Adhyatma. The Adhyatma is like more or less the subtle body, the thing that's driving us to other bodies, the Sodhava. And it's very devastating to be in a certain body and a certain ego, and then it's destroyed, and then you have to get created again and destroyed and created again. So then Krishna, then he says, but one who attains his abode never takes birth again. And in that place, it's eternal. So you don't have to deal with this. It's always free from these effects of the material world. So yeah, then Krishna explains why one would want to go to the spiritual world, stay there. And there was one shloka that we read that I wanted to highlight. Maybe we could read the purport. It was text 14. Ananya cheta satatam yomam smarati nityashaha tasyaham sulabhaparta nitya yuktasya yoginaha. For one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pritha, because his constant engagement in devotional service. So, as I was reading earlier, it was being described that Krishna is explaining, I already said a few times, but yogis chanting Om and controlling their prana and deciding to leave their body while thinking on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But this can be very, very difficult. But then here's Krishna saying, for one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain. And the key word here is ananya cheta, without deviation. It was described by what I was reading earlier. This is Krishna essentially explaining pure devotional service, that one who thinks of me, gives himself to me, without any other distraction, any other motive, with no deviation, then surely you'll come to him. And, Krishna reiterates this message at different points in different ways throughout the Bhagavad-gita. So it's very important to remember Krishna. So I'll read the purport and see what Prabhupada has to say. In this verse, the bhakti yoga of the unalloyed devotees of the Supreme Godhead is described. The preceding verses mention 4 different kinds of devotees: the distressed, the inquisitive, those who seek material gain, and the speculative philosophers. Different processes of liberation from material entanglement have also been described: karma yoga, jnana yoga, hatha yoga. But here, bhakti yoga, without any mixture of these, is mentioned. In bhakti yoga, the devotees desire nothing but Krishna. The pure bhakti devotee does not desire promotion to heavenly planets, nor does he seek salvation or liberation from material entanglement. A pure devotee does not desire anything. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the pure devotee is called Nishkama, which means he has no desire for self-interest. Perfect peace belongs to him alone, not to them who strive for personal gain. The pure devotee only wants to please the Supreme Lord, and so the Lord says that for anyone who is unflinchingly devoted to him, he is easy to attain. The devotee can render service to any of the transcendental forms of the Supreme Lord, and he meets with none of the problems that plague the practitioners of other yogas. Bhakti yoga is very simple and pure and easy to perform. One can begin simply by chanting Hare Krishna. Krishna is very merciful to those who engage in his service, and he helps in various ways that the devotee who is fully surrendered to him, so we can understand him as he is. The Lord gives such a devotee sufficient intelligence so that ultimately the devotee can attain him in spiritual kingdom. The special qualification of the pure devotee is that he is always thinking of Krishna without considering the time or place. There should be no impediments He should be able to carry out his service anywhere and at any time. Some say that the devotee should remain in holy places like Vrindavan or some holy town where the Lord lived, but a pure devotee can live anywhere and create the atmosphere of Vrindavan by his devotional service. Just like we were hearing in the Srimad Bhagavatam class this morning. It was Sri Advaita who told Lord Chaitanya, "Wherever you are, O Lord, there is Vrindavan." The pure devotee constantly remembers Krishna and meditates upon him. These are qualifications of the pure devotee, for whom the Lord is most easily attainable. Bhakti Yoga is the system that the Gita recommends above all others. Generally, the Bhakti Yogis are engaged in 5 different ways. Shanta Bhakta, engaged in devotional service and neutrality. Dasya Bhakta, engaged in devotional service as servant. Sakya Bhakta, engaged as a friend. Vatsalya Bhakta, engaged as parent. In Madhurya Bhakta, engaged in as conjugal lover of the Supreme Lord. In any of these ways, the pure devotee is always constantly engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord and cannot forget the Supreme Lord. And so for him, the Lord is easily attained. A pure devotee cannot forget the Supreme Lord for a moment. And similarly, the Supreme Lord cannot forget his pure devotee for a moment. This is the great blessings of the Krishna consciousness process of chanting the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna. It's a very nice purport. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Yes, Jagannath Prabhu.
I have a comment and question. If you'd be so kind as to let me. Thank you. So I was, I really like this point about what Krishna says about remembering. I don't remember if it was at the time of death or always. I think it was at the time of death. But I just wanted to say that Srila Prabhupada says that the easiest way to remember Krishna is by chanting Hare Krishna always. So we can take that as an instruction from Srila Prabhupada and always chant Hare Krishna.
Satatam Kirtayantamam. Always chanting.
And so my question is, you may have already, I think you did already answer this, but so why does one want to go to the spiritual world?
Well, I'll ask a question to you. Why does one want to go to the material world?
To enjoy.
Is there enjoyment? So
you go to the spiritual world to enjoy.
to the soul Satchidananda. And that's only, in the spiritual world. So we want to go be ourself, our real self, and wake up from the dream that we're in. Comprende? Similar question, comment, thoughts, reflections?
Hare Krishna. I had a few comments, if that's okay. So I was thinking of 2 things. The first thing was when we were hearing about Vrindavan. Okay, 3 things. So I was listening to some very short YouTube short by His Holiness Kadamba Kanana Swami, and he was talking about how we all live in Vrindavan. We can think that we're just tourists of any place. We're just touring this place. But our real home is in Goloka Vrindavan. I thought that was really nice, really short and sweet. And we're just checking it out to see if we like it. But anyways, that's my first comment. The second one was Jai Keshav and I were reading the Bhagavatam today, and I thought it'd be nice to share a verse if that's okay. So we're in the 5th canto, and we're hearing about. Oh my gosh. We are hearing about Shukadeva Goswami is talking to Maharaj Parikshit about Lord Rishabdev and how he was a pure devotee and how he lived and what he was like, his activities. And I lost it. I'm sorry. One moment. I think it'd be really nice to read. I'll
just say one thing while you look for it.
Okay.
About this point of being a tourist, Maharaj, he'd say that, like he grew up in Amsterdam. One time he went to go back to visit Amsterdam, and he was looking for, anybody that was there, like when he was there, like in his high school, or, that grew up in his town or anything, and nobody was there. And next thing you know, a bus driver comes and pulls up. And it's like, oh, Swamiji, please take donation. Like, he was looking for something that connected him back to his life, his old life. But then, at that time, the devotee shows up, and, it's like Krishna saying, no, like, this is your real family. This is your real life. It was just like a point that he would connect to that.
Okay, I found the verse. It's Canto 5, verse 6. Canto 5, chapter 6, verse 17. The Sanskrit is hard for me to read, but I'll read the English. Devotees always bathe themselves in devotional service in order to be relieved from the various tribulations of material existence. By doing this, the devotees enjoy supreme bliss, and liberation personified comes to serve them. Nonetheless, they do not accept that service, even if it is offered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. For the devotees, liberation, mukti, is very unimportant because having attained the Lord's transcendental loving service, they have attained everything desirable and have transcended all material desires. I just wanted to add that to the nectar.
Jai, thank you. You had something to say?
Hare Krishna. So in text 7, we read in or hear from Srila Prabhupada in the purport that the Lord does not say that one should give up his prescribed duties or engagements, and he can continue them and at the same time think of Krishna by chanting Hare Krishna. So it seems that on one hand he's saying, okay, you can do these material activities and you'll still attain Krishna Loka. But then it also seems that he's advocating for these other strict devotional activities to be done. So how to reconcile that?
If I would have kept reading on, what I was reading, there's a part that really touches on this, and I'm going to try to remember, but okay, yeah, there's a shloka here where Krishna says, think of him performing your action, It's where Krishna is instructing Arjuna to just remember him while performing his duty. And then in the next shloka, he says, so fight. If I could find this, wherever it is, it'd be helpful. Maybe he was in the previous chapter. Anyways, basically, Krishna was telling him the importance of remembering him. And then he instructed Arjuna to, while you're performing your duties and activities, remember me. And then the point was brought up that, in between the lines, in between the shlokas, maybe Arjuna thought, oh, So Krishna is really saying, just remember me. And then the next shloka, Krishna says, therefore, fight this battle, perform your duty. So it's not like he's saying, remember me and, abandon everything. Perform your duty and, integrate Krishna into your life, always remembering him and, cultivating the spirit of working for him. Because that's what the whole Bhagavad-gita is about. Arjuna wanted to renounce and leave everything. And Krishna said, no, like, you're a warrior. This is your nature. Later on, he talks about in the third chapter about, he mentions like, what can repression accomplish? Meaning like we have our own nature. We can't repress our nature. He talks about how dangerous it is to follow another's footsteps. So like we have to act out our role of who we are and learn to connect that to Krishna. If I try to be artificially renounced more than I am, eventually it will manifest. But then at the same time in that third chapter, Krishna talks about the perils of lust. And that one should nip it in the bud from the very beginning. So it's not like, oh, I have a material conditioned nature and this is me and, this is where I'm at. So let me enjoy a little sex desire. Let me enjoy some intoxication and remember Krishna. No, if one receives transcendental knowledge and they realize that lust has nothing to offer. So you have to deal with it right away. And, there's a shloka from Chanakya Pandit. What does he say that, taxes, fire, something else, like a debt of fire and disease, these things need to be dealt with right away. Lust is same. The sooner that we could deal with it and cut it out, the better, because it's just like scratching an itch that's not going to go away. So we have our conditioned nature. We can't jump out of it. We have to deal with it. So we have to work in Krishna's service to the best we can. And we're fortunate because Srila Prabhupada has given us a good framework to follow. And he's really presented the Varnashram Dharma. It's not fully implemented like he intended, but it's there. So, it's like we could look around and I could see a Grihasta, and in 20 years, he could be like a Pukka, sannyasi. And you could see this brahmachari who's like super fixed up, and, in 10 years, he could be like, married with like 10 kids. We never really know. We have this deep rooted nature that we have to deal with, but wherever we're at, we have to keep making advancement and keep remembering Krishna. Like you could work a job outside, playing in a band or whatever. It's not the most conducive environment for Krishna consciousness, but you're doing it and you're remembering Krishna, and then in your free time, you're hearing about Krishna, you're doing kirtan, you're reading the Bhagavad-gita, hearing the Bhagavad-gita, and then you're making spiritual advancement that's very tangible. And then as you make spiritual advancement, you can see things more clearly of, how things affect you and which moves to make. So it's always a progressive thing, but we can't skip ahead. But the whole point is we should always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. So everything that we do should support that. That's the foundational principle of our whole philosophy. Whatever we're doing should help us remember Krishna and help us not forget Krishna. And if whatever we're doing is helping us forget Krishna, then we need to really analyze what's going on and make adjustment and changes. It's not that we make an excuse, because, Arjuna, he's being instructed by the Lord himself, and he's being instructed to fight the battle because he thought the battle was immoral, and he gave so many different points. What excuse do we have? We don't have any excuse. There's no Dharma is not being upheld within our society. You look around and it's completely disastrous everywhere you go. So everything is pointing that, devotional service is the only way. So the more that we could do, the better. You can kind of just keep going back and forth on these topics, but it's like you have your karma and it's your fault, so you have to deal with it. And we can't escape it, so we have to serve Krishna, remember Krishna, and by this way, it gets destroyed. Magadari Prabhu was mentioning yesterday, it's out of the second chapter of the Bhagavatam. Describes the process of bhakti yoga very nicely. Text 5 through text 21. Yeah, text 21. And, it describes how one attains faith, how one attains spiritual realization, and how one serves the devotees who are free from all attachment. They also develop an attraction for hearing the Lord's message. From hearing the Lord's message, then this knot in the heart is pierced. It's yada niryasina yukta karma granti nibandanam. Karma granti nibandanam, that the knot in the heart. Chindanti kovadas tasya kona karyat katavritim. Thus the knot in the heart is pierced. Kona karyat katavritim. Who will not pay attention to this message of this kata? Who will not become attracted to this, because it will pierce the hearts of the karma that's entangling you in the material world. And this is done by serving the great Vaishnavas who are free from that. And by following suit, we develop realization. We realize that I'm not my body. And from realizing you're not your body, then you become detached from the material situation that you're in. Problem is, we still think we're our body, so then therefore we have to act from that platform and then remember Krishna and go through the purification. Because if we're at the platform where, I'm not my body, I don't need to eat, I don't need to sleep, I just need to do service and chant the Lord's glories. Very difficult. So then we need to actively engage our senses in service. And that can look many different ways for many different people. Like a mother raising kids in a Krishna conscious way. That could be pure devotional service. It's not that, only a sannyasi is pure devotional service. There may be many sannyasis who actually, aren't so pure. Color of a cloth is just a color. Krishna sees the purity of our intention, of our heart. Any other final thoughts? Okay, last thing.
So I remember we were talking about this a little bit. We touched on it, and you were saying that we shouldn't really focus on this aspect of Krishna consciousness because it can be considered material, because when we focus on something and it's not Krishna, that's considered material. So this is something, but it's something that always gets my mind, because I struggle with these feelings of anxiety and depression and, hopelessness and things like this. So my question is, will we feel less anxiety if we do our duty rather than doing another's duty? Will we feel less anxiety if we do our duty rather than doing another's duty, performing another's duty?
We may feel more anxiety.
Feel more anxiety?
We may. It depends on the situation and the personality, but this is why Krishna says it's dangerous to follow another's path, because if you perform your duty, then you will learn and overcome and face the challenges that you have to face so that you can grow in the proper way. And, anxiety and depression, as a conditioned soul, it's there. And if we do go on chanting Hare Krishna and performing devotional service, then these things will be uprooted and eradicated. But how that manifests, it can happen in different ways. It can happen in many different ways. Maybe, You just get a higher taste, and all of a sudden you don't even worry about those things. So then it just is non-existent anymore. Maybe, you can't get over it. So then Krishna sends a devotee into your life that makes you think about it or process it or deal with it. Maybe we actually have to do some soul searching and, overcome some of the impediments, the thing that hold us back ourselves. We shouldn't dwell too much in that realm, because our focus should be on service, and have faith that service will uproot these things. Sarva parivinirmuktam tat parivena nirmalam rishikena rishikesa sevanam bhakti uchite. It means sarva pari. Your pari means like a material designation. You're a football player, you're a brother, you're a person from this kind of country, upadis, so many upadis. Sarva parivinirmuktam. All upadis, they'll be eradicated, they'll be removed. We engage our senses in the service of the master of the senses, Rishikesh. So that's there, but how much faith do we have in that? So then we have to search, okay, I hear this and I talk this, I quote this shloka, I'm sitting on the Vyasasana and saying this, but how much do I actually believe that? And then you could think, okay, maybe I've been at the temple 2 years. 2 years ago, I had this many problems. My life was a disaster. I had this thing going on, and look at my life now. Look how much advancement has been made just by chanting Hare Krishna and doing service. What will happen in another 2 years, another 5 years, 10 years, if I actually take it serious? And then we can look at people who are more advanced than us, more senior to us, and ask them how they've overcome these things and how they've advanced and how it's easier now than it was before. A lot of times, personally speaking, we're coming from so much tamagun that you don't even know what anxiety is, because you just hide away from doing things and living life. So now here, sober, no distractions, and I have to do things. So then I'm in anxiety because, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this. Just chant Hare Krishna and depend on Krishna. All of our problems are coming because we're not depending on Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad-gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Shri Gaura ki jai. Jai Guru Hari Hari Bol. Vanchikapatulubhischa kripasanubhi evacha. Titanam pavani vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Thank you, everybody, for tolerating me. I wish I could have presented the whole chapter in a better way.